Story. We're joined by Mohammad Marandi. He's a Middle East analyst and professor at Tehran University. Professor Marandi, thank you very much for speaking to us here on TRT World.
Yeah.
Iran says allegations of drone activity are ridiculous, but this footage really seems to indicate that there was a drone in the area. Was it or was it not an Iranian drone?
Well, the point is not whether it was an Iranian drone or not. The point is that the drone was operating in Syrian territory, and the Israeli regime attacked the drone over Syrian airspace. That is the issue. The footage that the Israeli regime released does not prove anything with regards to the whereabouts of the drone. And it's actually quite interesting that the Israelis would bomb Syria and fly over Lebanon, for that matter, in response to an alleged drone intrusion into Syria, into their airspace.
Professor, I'm sorry to interrupt. It's not the first time. I'm sorry to interrupt you, sir. It's not the first time that Israel conducts such operations. It has been playing a role in Syria for a while now. But it says Iran is also playing a more direct role in the war in Syria, even setting up bases there. Is that so?
No, I don't think that there's any indication that Iran has any permanent bases in Syria, but Iran is helping the fight against ISIS, and it's helping the fight against al-Qaeda. In fact, the Israeli regime is aiding al-Qaeda on its border, and this is not something that's secret. This is something that you could use a search engine and find out. It's very much in the open. The Israelis treat al-Qaeda wounded militants. They fund militants on the Syrian border, and they attack Syrian army targets whenever the Syrian army is getting the upper hand against al-Qaeda. On the other hand, on another part of the Syrian border with the Israeli regime, ISIS is tolerated. In the corner between Jordan, Israel, and Syria, we have a pocket of ISIS forces and the troops and militants, and the Israelis do nothing about it. In fact, the Israeli regime, the head of Israeli military intelligence, said we prefer ISIS over the Syrian government. And the former defense minister of the Israeli regime said that once ISIS lobbed a mortar by mistake into our territory and immediately apologized. So we know that the relationship between the Israeli regime and the extremists in Syria is quite extensive, and the Iranians are helping to eradicate these groups, which are trying to create a permanent presence and create a buffer zone between Israel and Syria, just like the Americans, along with the PKK, are trying to create a permanent presence in the east and north of Syria. This is something that Iran sees as unacceptable.
And sir, what is likely to happen next? Could we see the war in Syria, which is already complicated enough, escalate even further because of this conflict between Israel and Iran?
Well, this is not a conflict between Israel and Iran. This is a conflict between Israel and the Syrian people and the government of Syria. This reminds one of apartheid South Africa, Israel's sister apartheid state. In the past, the apartheid regime in South Africa, they would demonize the ANC by calling them communists and affiliated to the Soviet Union. And the ANC and Nelson Mandela were considered as terrorists by Western countries. And even when President Mandela was the president of South Africa, he was banned from entering the United States. He had to get special permission to enter the country. So the Israeli regime is trying to use Iran as a scapegoat in order to justify its behavior towards the Syrian people. What brought down the Israeli jet was the Syrian air defense. And I personally think that the Syrian air defense has even more advanced weapons that are under lock and key at the moment. But the Israelis have failed in this round, and I think it's a sign of a changing times. The Israelis have failed multiple times in invading Gaza, even though they slaughtered thousands of innocent people. They lost the war against Hezbollah, and now even the Israeli regime's air defense capabilities are somewhat questionable.
All right, Professor Mohammad Marandi, Middle East analyst and professor at Tehran University. Thank you very much for speaking to us here on TRT World.